Welcome. Army veteran Mike McNamara here for the Sit Rep. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Scott Eddy, a supervisory HR specialist, and we're going to talk about a really unique subject, and that is, how do you get a federal job? You know, what are the particulars and what goes into qualifying for and getting hired and then working for the federal government? So, Scott, welcome.
Thank you.
I think for a lot of our viewers out there, there's a lot of terms that fly around for federal employment. But for veterans, they also hear veterans preference. What exactly is that? What does veterans preference talk about and entail?
So as a veteran, when you're applying for federal jobs, there are different things that entitle you to the right to apply for a federal job. So depending on when you were a veteran, when you served, how long you served, if you're a disabled veteran or not, you qualify for different points within the veteran preference realm. Some veterans will not apply for any points at all. Some will apply for what they call 5-point preference, which is somebody who was not disabled, served during certain timeframes. If you're a disabled veteran, you get a 10-point preference. And what that means is as you apply for jobs, the federal laws are such that people with a higher point preference get preference over other applicants. So depending on how the job was announced, a 10-point preference person would get preference over everybody. He would get preference over 5-point preference, non-preference eligible, and civilians. So that would mean when the referral list comes down, the people who are going to be able to get looked at for that job, 10-pointers have to be looked at first before anybody else can even be considered. And then so on down the list. 5-point preference before anybody else, and then veterans before you get to regular civilians.
Okay, so what do the points make reference to? Is there a bonus system? Is it so when you say 10-point preference, what do the points go to? What are the points?
It's not really they don't really go to anything of that sort. It's just how you rank applicants as far as who can be referred and who can't. So it's not like if you're ranked against a civilian, you get 5 extra points in the score. Things aren't scored that way. It's just whether you should be looked at before a different group of people. So it kind of ranks the groupings of people.
And I think you did make mention, but the current law does, I don't want to say push, that's not the right word, but the current law does encourage
Absolutely.
people to hire veterans
Absolutely.
as long as they're qualified, maybe over another applicant who is not a veteran.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
The way veterans preference works, it's to encourage federal agencies to hire veterans over other people or before they consider other people. There's also some other intricacies of veterans preference that allow veterans to be hired without consideration for other applicants. So a 30% disabled veteran, for example, 10-point preference, they can actually be hired for any federal job for which they qualify, as long as their resume shows that they're qualified. That's a job that doesn't have to be announced on USA Jobs or Monster or any of those other sites. If you're a 30% disabled veteran and you qualify for a job, you can be hired outright without any competition at all, and so on down the line. So I mean, there's some rules like that for 5 points as well.
So if I'm a 50% disabled veteran and I'm applying for a job to be a plumber at a VA hospital, and I'm a plumber, I have all the certificates, I'm a plumber. Yep. Then when my resume hits HR, then technically they could call me and say, if you want the job, you're hired because you're 50% disabled, you are a plumber, you're a certified plumber, and we're going to hire you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And even if it wasn't advertised, if you were a 30% disabled veteran and you want to work somewhere like the Providence VA Medical Center, you could send your resume to the Providence VA Medical Center and they can consider you for any job you might qualify for based on your disability. And then if you were to apply for a job as a disabled veteran, a 10-point preference, you would get preference over any other applicant. So before they could even look at a 5-point preference or a regular civilian, they would have to consider your resume by law.
Okay. But I think the key point, the takeaway of this is, though, you have to be qualified.
Absolutely.
So I couldn't decide, even though I'm a disabled veteran, I couldn't say, I want to be a doctor here
Correct.
at the VA hospital.
Yeah, you still have to meet the minimum qualifications for any position which you want to be hired for. And those qualifications are laid out by OPM and can be found on OPM under the qualification standards for every job in the federal government.
And many times they're in a job announcement itself.
Absolutely.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, if you're applying through a job announcement, there'll be a section titled qualifications. You need to meet those qualifications to even be considered.
Okay. I think that's an important piece to take away from this, so that, I am a disabled veteran. I want the director's job.
Yeah.
Obviously you have to have qualifications.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so that's interesting about veterans preference, but is it similar to the GI Bill? And what I mean by that is, can you transfer it? Can veterans preference be used by a spouse or other family member?
Yeah, so in very specific situations, veterans preference can be sent to your spouse. So if you're a 100% disabled veteran and it's been clearly articulated in your disability letter that you cannot work, then you can transfer it to your spouse, but it needs to meet those two criteria.
So your spouse then could claim, I guess, veterans preference.
Absolutely.
But that letter would have to be included, I'm assuming,
Yes.
with your application packet.
Absolutely. The spouse, he or she would need to include that documentation in their application to show that the actual veteran themselves is disabled and cannot work.
Okay. And then the spouse would then be afforded the same opportunity, with the point system and the veterans preference system, as far as placing them somewhere in the order of merit,
Yes,
so to speak.
absolutely. They would receive the preference over other applicants.
Okay, so I'm a veteran, either disabled or not, and I'm interested in work with the federal government and any branch of the federal government. How do I go about finding the jobs? Where are they on Monster? Where how do I find the jobs?
So you often might find them on Monster, Indeed, or some of those other sites, but in reality, the best place to go is USA Jobs. USA Jobs is built to house every federal job, all federal agencies. The USA Jobs website is been going through a lot of improvements over the years, and it's the easiest and best place right now to find any federal job with any federal agency.
And is it usajobs.com?
usajobs.gov.
.gov.
Yep.
Okay.
usajobs.gov.
All right.
And
then, so, okay, I log into, or I, bring up usajobs.gov. What's next? I'm assuming it's a big government website. So
Yep.
what's next?
So there are a few things you should do, right? If you're looking to get into federal employment, the very first thing I would recommend you do is go to USA Jobs and build a profile. So what they do is they allow you to build a profile that talks about what veterans preference you might have, update documents such as your DD-214 or your disability letters or your SF-15, all those documents that you would need when you apply. They allow you to build a profile, add all those documents there. That way, when you do get ready to apply, they're already there. You're not searching for them. You're not trying to find them. You're not trying to scan them and upload them last minute. The other benefit to USA Jobs, it allows you to build search engines. You can build those search engines based on several factors. Location, you just want to, hey, I want to work in Hawaii. I'm going to build a search engine for Hawaii. Or I want to get paid huge money. I want to be a GS-15 somewhere. You can build those search engines for any different factor, any different criteria that you are interested in defining your job search by. Those search engines can be built to send you updates on a daily basis, anytime a job hits, on a weekly basis, things like that. And the reason that becomes really important, typically a federal job is advertised for about 7 days, 7 calendar days, so about 5 business days. So oftentimes if people aren't checking USA Jobs regularly, they'll miss the job they wanted because, I went to it 2 weeks ago, it's gone already. So if you build those search engines, they're going to give you a notice. Hey, this week, this job's out there. Hey, today, they just posted this new job. It fits the criteria you're looking for. So the search engines become a nice tool to make sure that you're not the one doing the legwork of going to Indeed, going to Monster, going to USA Jobs. They're just going to send you an email when there's one that meets the criteria you're looking for.
All right, good. That's really good. Now, once I've done that, and now I tell it to search, I tell the system to search, I'm assuming it comes up with a listing of jobs that meet the criteria of my search. What do I do then? What's the next piece then? Something intrigues me. I see something, I click on it. What should I be looking at? What should I be thinking about?
So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to click on that job announcement. There are a couple really important sections to read through. There's going to be one section that articulates who's allowed to apply. It actually is titled "Who Can Apply," and that's the first place you're going to look. Right? Those are going to say whether it's open to the public, whether it's open to federal employees only, and you're going to be looking for those jobs that are open to status, meaning veteran status, or open to the public. Those are jobs that any veteran can apply for. And then when you're looking at that, the next thing to look down for is qualifications. There's going to be a section in the announcement that specifically articulates the qualifications of the job. And you're going to need to make sure you match those qualifications. And then there's a section of the announcement that's going to talk about the duties of the job, knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to get that job. So at that point, if you've already built a profile in USA Jobs, it'll become really easy to apply. There's going to be a button down the bottom that says apply. You hit apply, you attach the right documents, you attach your updated resume, and that's pretty simple. As long as the document's already there. If you haven't already built a profile, then you're just going to attach those that first time, which will take a little longer. And if you don't have them already pre-populated, you might be scrambling to find them. Most people don't necessarily know where their DD-214 is, so they're scrambling to find it. And maybe they don't have a scanned copy that's legible, so they're rushing last minute. And if you've only noticed the job last second, you may run out of time. It's really important to note all jobs have a closing date. Anybody who wants to apply needs to apply before that closing date, midnight on the day of the closing. Any application received after midnight on that closing date can't be reviewed. We're not allowed to, based on the way the rules are written. If you come in late, you're no longer being considered. Even if you're late by hours, job closed at midnight, you apply at 6 a.m. the next morning, you're still too late. So having those profiles built, having the search engines there are going to save you some time when you find the job you want and you're trying to rush to apply.
Okay. That's a good point. The other point you brought up or you mentioned that I've heard is totally different than the civilian side of the house, and that is resumes.
Absolutely.
When you step outside into the public, kind of the going idea is the one pager. Nobody wants to read more than one page, lay it all out on one page. That's not necessarily true for the federal government.
It's absolutely not true. So for the federal government, it's quality over quantity every day. So it could be a 1 or 2 page resume, 1 or 2 page resume could be completely adequate. But typically it's not, based on the way we have to review jobs. So we're used to seeing resumes that are much longer. I'm not surprised to see resumes that are 5 to 9 pages, depending on how much work experience somebody might have. There are several important factors that make our resumes, what we're looking for on a resume, longer. So for example, we are not allowed to make any assumptions. As HR people for the federal government, we can't make any assumptions. So if you don't articulate on your resume the dates you were at a job, if you just say you were there from 2008 to 2009, I can't assume it was January of 2008 to December of 2009 and give you 2 years of credit. I'm restricted to assuming the worst case, which is 1 month in each year, because you didn't articulate the month and the year. That's one thing, right? And there's several things like that where we need to see more information on a federal resume. We're not allowed to assume any of your skills, knowledge, skills, or abilities. So it has to be articulated on your resume. So if the job says you need to type 40 words a minute, but you don't articulate that in your resume, even though you said you took a typing class, I can't assume you can type 40 words a minute. So reading the requirements in the job description, the duties, as well as the requirements for qualifications, and articulating those on your resume become very important with the federal resume. If you miss any of those things, you're not going to be considered qualified. And that goes into several different things. So there's, as I said, there's from to dates, full descriptions of your job, what duties you did in those jobs, highlight anything that you did in those jobs that was rewarded, anything that was recognized. Those are things that could help set you apart from other people, which gets a little longer in the resume than a civilian resume would. Another important fact that people should keep in mind, in the military, we're used to acronyms from the Army, acronyms from the Air Force, acronyms from the Navy. Those acronyms can often be the same acronym, mean very different things. So it's important in a federal resume to articulate those acronyms and spell them out. Coming as an Army veteran myself, I used to work for the Air Force, and the same acronym meant very different things for the two services. So without somebody spelling it out in a resume, it's easy to misinterpret what they're trying to say.
Okay, that's a good point.
Spelling out acronyms is an important thing.
How important is it then, because you bring up a really good point, and that depending on what MOS or job you had in the military, how does that cross over to civilian experience?
In some cases, really well. In other cases, not as well. But it's all about how the person articulates it on their resume. In a lot of cases, the person reviewing your resume is an HR generalist who may not know the specific field you're applying for. So when they're reviewing your resume, they're reviewing it versus the qual standards and the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And if you're not clearly translating what you did in the military to what its civilian equivalent might be, they might miss it. Just human nature, right? They might miss it. So it's really important to clearly articulate what's the same. Trying to think of a great example.
Well, I guess my follow-on question would be, if I was a communications specialist in the military, then right, there's probably a direct civilian correlation. But if I was an infantry soldier and I was kicking doors in Baghdad, how do I do I merit myself on leadership ability, or, because obviously I can't say, yes, I want to be a plumber at the VA hospital and I can kick doors in and put pipes in. So how do I tie in those more combat related jobs that probably don't directly correlate to something in the civilian world?
That's a really great question. And you kind of hit on it, right? It's all about how you articulate it. So as a former infantry officer myself, when I went into the civilian world, how you articulate leading men in combat, leading people in combat, how you articulate that on a resume to show that you managed a certain number of people, or you supervise a certain number of people, or you're responsible for their training requirements. You have to find ways to articulate what you're doing, but in a more civilian form or more civilian terms that more closely mirror what the requirements of the job are. So there is some art to it.
Okay. And you hit on a really interesting point that I'd like you to expand upon, if you would. And that is, I send my resume in. I send all these documents in. Yeah, it's not going to the hiring authority. It's not going to the person that I'm going to work for potentially in a job. It's going to an HR generalist. So Correct. It's going to an individual that's literally just reviewing all these resumes. And I think you also said may not even know anything about the job that I'm applying for. So yeah, how do I get through that first barrier, if you will?
Yeah. So it's a really important, it's a great note, right? So when you apply for a job, the first thing that's going to happen is all the resumes get saved in USA Jobs, and the back end of that is called USA Staffing. And a staffing specialist is going to go review everybody who applied. And the first thing they're going to look at is, does the person meet area of consideration? So I mentioned earlier, who may apply for a job? The very first thing a person is going to look at, an HR specialist is going to look at, is, do you meet that who may apply? If it was open only to federal employees and you're not a federal employee, they're going to stop looking at you right there. If it was open to veterans, you didn't attach the right documentation to prove you're a veteran, you didn't attach your DD-214, for example, they're going to stop looking at you right there. Okay. Right? Then, assuming you met who is able to apply the area of consideration, the very next thing they're going to start looking at is qualifications. That qualification section of the announcement is the very next thing they're going to look at. And do you meet the minimum qualifications? So that becomes the first breakdown of where you really get rid of some people, right? Assuming everybody met the area that they applied for a job they were able to apply for, it then becomes who meets those minimum qualifications, which gets us an even smaller list. Then you look at all the people that met the minimum qualifications. And then you start looking for those knowledge, skills, and abilities. And you're going to rank everybody that applied. So just because you applied and because you met minimum qualifications doesn't necessarily mean that your name's going to get sent to the referring official. Depending on how many people applied, the hiring official may only want the top 10 applicants.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah. So if 100 people apply and all 100 qualify, is there an order of merit list? Yeah. So
that's where veterans preference comes into play in some ways, right? If you're a 10-point veteran preference and 100 people apply, maybe only 5 had 10-point preference. So you're going to get to be the first 5 referred over, and then 5 points and downward. But say 100 people applied and all 100 were veterans. The first thing that's going to happen is, does everybody meet minimum qualifications? If they do, then you've got 100 people meet minimum qualifications. The next step is ranking those people from 1 through 100 based on what's written in the resume, how clearly they articulated the knowledge, skills, and abilities of that job. So we come
back to the resume again.
Exactly. It comes right back to the resume and how they articulated that they can do the duties of that job. And the people that do a better job articulating that end up at the top of that pile. And the people who don't do a great job articulating that end up falling down further. And the hiring official might only see the top 10. So you want to try to make sure you're doing all the little things to make sure you make that top 10.
Can the hiring official see everybody?
Absolutely.
If they want to.
Yeah, if they want to.
But okay. But 100 people is a lot.
Obviously out of consideration for time, depending on how many people apply, a hiring official might want to see everybody, which is great. We'd send them over everybody who's minimally qualified, and they'll interview everybody, theoretically.
Okay. So I guess coming back to this, we've had a lot of discussion that's gone back and forth, and you've really put a lot of good points out. So I guess to kind of sum it up as far as this part is, what are the top 3 things that a veteran should really think about and really do when applying for, what are those 3 most important things, in your opinion, that a veteran should really do when applying for a federal job?
So if I were a veteran looking for a job right now today, the first thing I would do is build my USA Jobs profile. And the reason I say that's number 1 is that's where everything starts for applying for a federal job. And that's where it's important to have the right documents, make sure they're legible. You want to make sure you have a DD-214 in there that somebody can read. It should be the member 4 copy of a DD-214. It should be legible, because if somebody can't read it, they may not refer you over. And that's the first thing, right? Because that's the first step, is getting your foot looked at. Let's get you looked at first. And that's the qualification piece. So getting your DD-214, getting those other relevant documents like your disability letter, your SF-15. That's number one. Number two is the resume. The resume, and number two is the most important of all of them in reality. The resume is the most important thing. If you can take time to clearly articulate what you've done in your resume, make sure it has the proper dates. I often recommend to people, USA Jobs has a format for a resume. I don't necessarily say that people should use it, but what people should do is look at that format. That format will not allow you to miss any of the important factors. The format itself is designed to ensure that a veteran or anybody applying doesn't miss anything that an HR person in the federal government is going to need to look at. So the date format is proper. They also look for hours. Are you full-time? Are you part-time? Makes a difference when we're qualifying people. Say you did a job for 1 year, full-time, we give you 1 year credit. You did that same job part-time for a year, we're only going to give you half credit, or depending on how much part-time you work. The USA Jobs resume format won't let you miss those things. They'll make you put in the number of hours, whether it's full-time, part-time, whether you worked 40 hours, 20 hours, it makes you put those in. But again, we consider every resume the same. So it's not necessarily that you have to use that format, but that format won't let you miss the important factors, where if you do it on your own, in your own format, you might miss them. So I would always recommend to people to look at the format, review that when you're updating your resume. And then just update the resume. You know, if you're applying for a job, don't use the same resume every time. Change your resume based on the requirements in the duties, in the job description. If the job description, you know, you're an former infantry officer, but the job's for a housekeeping aide, change it. Talk about how you've cleaned things. If the job is for, you're a former infantry officer, but the job is for supervising somebody, talk about all the opportunities you've had to manage people, how many people you've managed, what the diversity of the group was that you managed, what the management tasks were that you encompassed. Changing your resume based on the job you're applying for is insanely important. And then the last one I would say is build the search engines, right? You don't want to miss the job you're looking for, because that's one of those hard rules, right? If you don't apply on time, you're not going to get considered.
You're stuck. Yeah.
You know, and so those are probably the three biggest things for somebody to think about when applying for a federal job.
Okay. So I do all that. I do it successfully. I make it through the HR specialist review, and now I'm referred to the hiring authority. So my packet goes up to the person who's going to actually do the hiring.
Absolutely.
What should I be thinking about? My understanding is the government uses performance-based questions. What does that mean? What are those?
Yeah, so federal government uses what we call performance-based interview questions, PBI questions. There is a list of those that you can find through OPM. OPM has a lot of really useful tools for veterans or anybody.
Is it opm.gov?
OPM.gov.
OPM.gov.
OPM.gov has a full list of PBI questions, and you can go review those beforehand on what might be asked. But in reality, a PBI question is, it's a question based on a situation and how you would perform in that situation, right? Or how you have performed in that situation. So an example of a question might be, tell us about a time where you had to interact with an angry customer. How did you handle it? And what was the outcome? You know, it's more based on actions and what you've done than it is based on skills you might believe you have, or just talking about yourself in a general way. It's really geared towards context, action, and result. What was the situation? What did you do about it? And what was the result that came out of it? And if you can talk and answer those questions in that way, that's usually a really beneficial way to answer the questions. Right? You want to make sure you're talking about what you did and what came out of it, not just, you know, giving a general answer.
And then I guess my other question would be, based on that, is there any advice you would give a veteran? Because I know there's going to be different types of interviews. And what I mean by that is, if I'm living here in New England and I want my job in Hawaii, I'm probably going to do a phone interview or a Zoom interview. Obviously, that's far different than showing up in person and sitting across the table from somebody. Should there be things I should be thinking about when under those criteria, and also under a face-to-face criteria when I finally get my foot literally in the door to have an interview? So
for both situations, preparation is important. A lot of people think they can walk in an interview cold and just knock it out the park. But in reality, interviewing is a soft skill. If you don't use it, if you don't do it often, it goes away. You can be really uncomfortable. All of a sudden you're in a room, 3 people staring at you. It can be hard to talk. Or you get on a phone and there's a lot of silence coming from the other end. It can be really awkward. It can be off-putting. People can get a little rustled by it. So my recommendation is find a friend, a family member, a coworker, anybody who will let you practice the interview skills on them.
Okay.
All right. Look up some of the PBI questions, have them ask you them. That's something that everybody can do. And similarly, everybody can prep answers to those questions, right? If you're applying for an HR job, you can make some assumptions about what might be asked, right? Customer service is important. You might be asked about customer service. Have some of those stories prepped. Think about those stories beforehand. For any job you're going to apply for, think about the stories that make your experience relevant and make your experience stand out above other people. And that's where the benefit to phone interviews or in-person interviews comes into play. Some people do really well in in-person interviews. They look you in the eye, they shake your hand well, they speak articulately, and those things come across well in person. Some people don't do well in that situation. So the phone interview offers some benefit to them. And also the benefit to the phone interview, you can prep in a different way, right? If you're coming in an interview in person, you don't want a whole lot of material in front of you. You don't want papers lined up in front of you that you can reference back to. If you're on a phone interview, you have that ability. You can have a laptop open. You can have documents in front of you, your resume with notes, and you can refer to those on a phone interview. And that's something I would recommend to people. If you're doing a phone interview, have those notes prepared. Have a list of stories you might want to tell, depending on what the question is. And when they ask the question, look back at your notes. What's the best story to match the question they're asking? Those same things are relevant when you're in person, but they're just harder to do, right? You don't want to have a whole slew of notes.
For sure.
You can always ask going into an interview if you're allowed to have a notebook. Most interviews are going to tell you yes. And that's an important thing because you can have pre-prepared notes. The other thing you can have there is a notebook to take notes. A lot of times the PBI questions have multiple parts. So it'll tell us about this and what was the outcome of this. 2 parts to the same question. Oftentimes in interviews, you'll see people, because they're so caught up in the first part, they might forget to mention the second part. And they might lose some points in the scoring because they didn't address the full question. Both in person and over the phone, if you get asked a question with multiple parts, jot down a note. What were the parts? Make sure you answer both parts of that question because forgetting a part could hurt you in some ways. But in general, prepping for interviews is really the same. It's about preparing. It's about knowing what you want to say, knowing why you're the best person for the job and articulating that. I had an old commander used to say it's an elevator speech, right? You get in an elevator, the president steps in, you've got an elevator ride to tell him who you are and what you do. Interviews are the same way. You get a very limited time to try to articulate why you're the right person for the job. And that's what you need to do, why you're the best person for the job. And that's answering questions and also just trying to convey, again, it's another opportunity to convey your skills and why your skills and your abilities might be slightly better than somebody else.
So getting back to resumes again, you had some great points about making sure you tailor your resume to the job you're applying for. And that's very good advice. But what about, should you also show experience in other areas? For instance, I'm going to apply to be an HR specialist, but I also did I was a supervisor in retail or something a few years ago. So should I include all my work experience or just really concentrate on just relating to the job that's being advertised?
Yeah. When applying for a federal job, we will take any work experience or any experience into account. It doesn't even necessarily need to be work experience. So if you've had a volunteer experience, say you worked for the Boy Scouts, or say you were a basketball coach, any experience at all can be taken into account. So as you're trying to determine what to put in your resume and what not, if that experience, whether it's paid, unpaid, or whether it's federal experience, job experience, volunteer experience, if you can use it to articulate a point from the announcement, either a duty, a qualification, it's absolutely worth including. For myself, I've coached basketball. So when applying for supervisory jobs, coaching is on there, right? It's a part of supervising people, is coaching and mentoring people. So I absolutely put my coaching experience on my resume to try to help set myself apart from somebody else who may not have done that. And usually volunteering and those things are one of those things that might do exactly that. You're competing against other people with job experience, but in addition to that, you went and volunteered and did something for your neighborhood, or you did a different group. That volunteer experience could be that piece that sets you apart. So if it's relevant and you can apply it to the job you're looking to apply for, absolutely should be included.
So what about other areas you may have experiences you may have? And what I mean by that is, I'm multilingual. I speak multiple languages. It's not in the job description or it's not in the job description or the KSAs, but is that important? Are unique things like that also important to make sure that are being seen on my resume?
Yeah. Depending on the job you're applying for, they may or may not be. The most important thing to get through on your resume is the duties and the qualifications of the position. Again, those special skills and additional skills may at the end of the day set you apart, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time focusing on those. Really what you focus on your resume needs to be is what are the requirements of that job. Those things that may not relate in some way, but you think might be important, I just wouldn't spend a lot of time on them. They may be worth adding in some way, but it's not a focus I would put on my resume if I were applying for a position.
If it doesn't relate.
If it doesn't
has
relate.
really nothing
Absolutely,
to do with the job I'm applying for. It's nice to know information.
The important thing is always relating your resume back to that announcement, back to what that announcement is asking for, because that's how your resume is going to be evaluated. It's going to be evaluated based on what's in the announcement and do you meet what's in there. What's important when you look at the resume and in general, it's not necessarily the length or the amount of bullets, right? If you're trying to articulate that you're a subject matter expert in it, it's all about how good of a bullet you write. Fluff versus fact, right? Facts in bullets, quantitative numbers in bullets, those are things that set you apart. If you're trying to articulate that you manage people, you can just say, I managed a bunch of people. That gets you most of the way there, right? Because if the duty asks for, do you know how to manage people? And you just say, yes, I manage people in this job. That may be enough to get you minimally qualified. But then if you write a really good bullet on your resume, that's quantitative. I managed 35 people in all aspects of training, finances. And you articulate it differently and you try to use those tools, like I said, quantitative tools to try to articulate. Those are things that are going to set you apart. So how those bullets read, it's not necessarily the number of bullets. You might be able to articulate it in one bullet. That's a great bullet. I managed 35 people in all aspects of blah, blah, blah. That might be a really amazing bullet, but it also might take you 2 or 3 bullets. I managed 40 people in these areas, and then have another bullet that talks about, additionally, I mentored or served as a mentor for 5 people that weren't in my chain of command. It might take you a number of bullets, but the important thing is the quality of those bullets and making sure that they clearly articulate why, or the breadth of what you've done, the depth of what you've done, and doing so usually in a intelligent, quantitative way versus just a generic, fluffy statement about, I'm the best at this. Well, why are you the best?
Okay.
I'm the best at this because I received an award 3 quarters in a row as NCO of the quarter for being a great non-commissioned officer. Those additional bullets and those additional things within a bullet can really set you apart. So it's not just making the general statement of, I'm a subject matter expert. Articulate it. Why? What have you done? If you're applying for a finance job, I managed a budget, or I managed a budget worth $20 million, or I did inventories of $20 million of equipment monthly. Those are things that can set people apart as far as the bullets go and how to articulate it on a resume.
So I think what's important today that I've taken away just listening to you, and it's a lot of great information, but I think what's been important today is a couple things. One, understand usajobs.gov. If you want to work for the federal government, that's your starting point.
Absolutely.
Get into USA Jobs, build your profile, set up your search engines to search for the jobs you want in the areas you want.
Absolutely.
And then next, just do away with whatever resume you've had and really concentrate on building a resume for federal employment. And then tailoring that resume to the job announcement that you choose to apply for.
Absolutely. Any time you can spend on your resume applying for a federal job is time well spent, whether that's editing it for the job you want or just making a quality document that has all the required information. You'd almost laugh at the amount of times we get resumes that the phone number is not valid, the email address isn't valid. So you try to reach out to the person, you have no way of contacting them. And that seems like a small little thing. But then if you're qualified for a job and we can't get a hold of you,
it's going to be hard to get the job.
All because you didn't update your resume.
Right.
Any time you can spend on your resume to make sure that it's up to date, accurate, quality information in there, it's time well spent.
And then make sure your supporting documents are there and legible. As you said, your 214,
Absolutely.
your SF-15, a cover letter.
Any license that might be required,
Licenses,
certifications that might be
okay,
required.
right.
If they're not legible, or if it's just that bad of a copy where we can't make it out, we can't consider it.
One area we didn't talk about to jump on, though, how important is it and how hard should I look at references?
References are important. For right now, currently for the VA, we have to check references. It's a requirement for us. So we're going to call a reference. So preparing references, making sure that those references know they're a reference, it's usually a good thing.
Yeah, I would think so.
Well, you'd be surprised. Oftentimes, making sure that the contact information for your references is still valid. So for me, if I wanted to use my former boss when I worked for the Air Force, she's retired. Before I apply for a job, I reach out just to make sure her phone number is still valid and she's still willing to be a reference. You know, and again, you'd be surprised at how many times somebody puts down a reference and the phone number is no good. And then we have to contact the person, ask for another reference, and you're just slowing down the whole process. If you have that information prepared and attached when you apply, it just helps the whole process go smoother and faster.
So that's a great point, because I think a lot of people think references are kind of, oh, you have to do it. But if you're really qualified, they won't call. But the federal government's probably calling your references.
The VA right now, VISN 1 specifically, but the VA is requiring one reference check at a minimum for any job. So you should have valid references on there and be prepared to give references if you haven't initially, if you only applied with a resume, depending on what the job asked for. Be prepared to give references because most likely somebody's going to ask for them and they are going to call them.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for being here today. This has been really great information, and it's a question we get a lot as government employees, people asking us, you know, how'd you get that job? How do you do it? So we really appreciating you taking the time today to come in and talk with us.
Thank you for having me. And the last thing, seeing that you said that, if anybody ever has a question about applying for federal jobs, they should feel comfortable reaching out to the HR office at whatever agency they're looking to apply for. If they reach out to the HR specialist in an announcement, at the very bottom, there's always a point of contact. You can reach out to that point of contact to ask questions. They can ask all the questions they want prior to the closing date of the announcement.
Okay.
Once the announcement's closed, then we can't answer questions the same way. But if they were to reach out beforehand and say, hey, I applied, did I attach the right documents? The specialist should be able to give them that information. Now, they can't review them for quality at that point, but they can say, hey, yes, you did attach the right things.
For more information on this topic or other topics related to your veterans benefits, please search #TheSitRep on YouTube.